A stranger in the spotlight. The city of Los Angeles shimmered under the evening glow, its neon signs flickering in the distance, casting reflections on the smooth asphalt roads. Expensive sports cars purred as they coasted down the wide boulevards, their sleek exteriors a stark contrast to the warm hum of the bustling pedestrians weaving between luxury storefronts and high-end restaurants. In the heart of this glittering city, the Lumiere Grand stood tall, an emblem of exclusivity and prestige. It wasn't just a restaurant, it was an experience. Reserved for the elite, it boasted the finest French cuisine, served in an ambience so carefully curated that even the soft hum of conversations felt orchestrated. Crystal chandeliers hung like celestial constellations, casting a golden hue over the polished mahogany floors. The walls, adorned with abstract paintings worth small fortunes, seemed to whisper stories of extravagant dinners and whispered business deals. Only those who belonged in this world walked through its grand doors, or at least, that's what the staff believed. The arrival of an unassuming guest. The evening rush had just begun when the large, intricately carved doors swung open. A man stepped inside, his entrance largely unnoticed by the guests, but not by the staff. He wasn't the type of person who typically dined at Lumiere. He wore a simple, slightly wrinkled cotton jacket, paired with well-worn jeans and scuffed boots. His dark hair was slightly tousled, and though his face was familiar, it was partially hidden behind an air of humility. Keanu Reeves walked in, his gaze scanning the restaurant, not with the wide-eyed admiration of a first-time visitor, but with quiet curiosity, as if he was revisiting a place he had once known. He was a man who had graced the covers of countless magazines, whose face had been projected onto massive billboards, yet he moved without any air of self-importance. To him, this was just a dinner, one he was looking forward to in peace. But to Ashley, one of the restaurant's most esteemed waitresses, it was an anomaly she couldn't ignore. Ashley, the guardian of exclusivity. Ashley had worked at Lumiere Grand for over 5 years, and in her eyes, she had earned her place among the elite. She wasn't just a waitress, she was the gatekeeper of luxury. Every detail mattered. The way a guest dressed, the way they spoke, even how confidently they handled the delicate silverware. To her, this restaurant was more than just a fine dining establishment. It was a sanctuary for the truly refined. When she saw Keanu enter, dressed in what she could only describe as commoner's attire, her polished expression briefly faltered. She stole a glance at her coworkers, who also noticed him but said nothing. As if on cue, a sense of silent judgment passed between them. With a carefully composed mask of professionalism, Ashley approached Keanu at the reception desk, her arms crossed subtly behind her back. "Good evening," she greeted with the same rehearsed elegance she used for all guests, but her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Do you have a reservation?" Keanu, ever polite, returned her smile. "No, I don't. But I'd love a table, if one's available." Ashley tilted her head, her trained eyes sweeping over his appearance again, noting every detail that stood out. The jacket, the boots, the lack of a designer watch on his wrist. Definitely not our usual clientele, she thought. Her smile tightened as she clasped her hands together. "Lumiere Grand is a very exclusive dining experience," she said, her voice laced with subtle condescension. "We do have some tables available, but—" She hesitated, as if searching for a way to gently suggest that he might be out of place. Keanu remained unfazed. "That's great. I'll take one," he said, his voice warm, yet firm. Ashley blinked, momentarily caught off guard by his confidence. Most people, when subtly discouraged, would take the hint and leave. But not this man. She cleared her throat and forced another smile. "Of course," she said, leading him through the restaurant. A seat in the shadows. The restaurant was bustling with activity, its prime tables occupied by impeccably dressed guests. A well-known fashion designer toasted a successful runway show. A group of executives murmured over a lucrative business deal, and a Hollywood power couple enjoyed a candlelit dinner, their faces occasionally illuminated by the soft glow of their phones. Ashley maneuvered past all of them, her strides purposeful as she guided Keanu away from the center of the dining room, away from the velvet chairs and the grand chandeliers. Instead, she led him to a small table in the farthest corner of the restaurant, near the kitchen, where the ambient noise of clanking dishes and hurried staff disrupted the otherwise tranquil atmosphere. She stopped abruptly, gesturing towards the isolated table. "Here you go," she said with an exaggerated smile, placing the menu down with a slight thud. "This table is a little more private. I thought it would suit you." Keanu glanced at the dimly lit corner, then back at Ashley. There was no irritation in his expression, no visible sign of offense, just a knowing look, as if he understood exactly what she was trying to do. He smiled. "Thank you. This will be perfect." Ashley hesitated, waiting for him to protest, to request a better table, to at least look uncomfortable. But instead, he simply took his seat, flipping open the menu as though he had been seated at the finest spot in the house. Frustrated by his lack of reaction, she turned on her heels and briskly walked away. Mockery from afar. From the other side of the dining room, Ashley whispered to a fellow waitress, a smirk curling on her lips. "I give him 5 minutes before he realizes he can't afford anything and leaves." Her coworker, a newer staff member who had seen her fair share of arrogance in the hospitality industry, frowned. "He seems nice. Maybe he just prefers dressing casually." Ashley scoffed. "Please. People who belong here look like they belong here. Trust me, I can spot a pretender a mile away." Meanwhile, Keanu sat in his corner, scanning the menu leisurely, completely unaware, or perhaps completely unbothered, by the murmurs around him. The first test. When Ashley finally returned to take his order, her skepticism was barely hidden behind her forced professionalism. "Have you decided what you'd like?" she asked, her voice laced with insincere politeness. Keanu pointed to one of the most expensive dishes on the menu. "The filet de boeuf Orsini, please." Ashley raised an eyebrow. That was a $350 dish. "You do know how much that costs, right?" she asked, her smirk returning. Keanu met her gaze, his expression as calm as ever. "Yes, it sounds wonderful." Ashley pursed her lips, suppressing a laugh. She scribbled down the order dramatically, shaking her head slightly. "All right. Just making sure. We wouldn't want any misunderstandings." Keanu simply nodded. "I appreciate your concern." Her smirk faltered for just a second before she spun around and walked away. Across the room, an older gentleman, who had been observing the interaction, raised his wine glass slightly in Keanu's direction, a silent toast to his patience. Keanu acknowledged the gesture with a small nod. As Ashley placed the order in the system, she leaned against the bar, speaking just loud enough for her coworkers to hear. "This is going to be interesting," she mused, shaking her head. "Let's see how long he lasts before he asks for the check." But what she didn't realize, what no one in that restaurant yet understood, was that this was no ordinary guest. And soon, everything was about to change. The game begins. The dining room of Lumiere Grand thrived with an aura of exclusivity, where whispered conversations and the clinking of expensive wine glasses formed the natural symphony of the evening. The elegant guests, dressed in designer suits and flowing silk gowns, existed in their own world, one where status dictated service. But in the dimly lit corner of the restaurant, far from the golden chandeliers, sat a man who defied their expectations. Keanu Reeves, an unassuming presence amidst luxury, had just ordered one of the most expensive dishes on the menu. His calm demeanor was a stark contrast to the mild chaos unraveling in the minds of those who had noticed him. Ashley, the restaurant's most self-assured waitress, had orchestrated his placement in the least desirable part of the establishment. She had expected resistance. She had expected an awkward retreat. Instead, she was met with nothing but effortless composure. And it infuriated her. A deliberate delay. With his order taken, Keanu leaned back in his chair, his eyes wandering over the fine details of the restaurant's architecture. The warm glow of the chandeliers, the intricate patterns carved into the mahogany pillars, the hushed murmurs of elite diners immersed in discussions of wealth and power. It was all so familiar. But tonight, he observed it from an entirely different perspective. Meanwhile, Ashley had no intention of making his experience enjoyable. Instead of immediately submitting his order, she deliberately stalled, prioritizing every other table before his. She flirted with a well-dressed businessman, giggling at a joke that wasn't remotely funny. She spent extra time at the bar, making sure a VIP's cocktail was delivered with utmost perfection. She even checked on a guest who had only ordered a simple salad before finally glancing at Keanu's order slip. "Still here," she muttered under her breath, a small smirk creeping onto her lips. As she made her way back to his table, she slowed her pace, making a show of appearing too busy to prioritize him. When she finally reached him, she feigned surprise. "Oh, you're still waiting." "My apologies," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "The kitchen is just a little overwhelmed tonight." Keanu simply nodded, the same quiet smile playing on his lips. "No problem. I understand." Ashley clenched her jaw. Why wasn't he reacting? Any other guest in his position would have expressed at least mild frustration, but Keanu, in his wrinkled jacket and scuffed boots, just waited. It unsettled her. Whispers and judgments. From across the room, an elegantly dressed woman nudged her husband. "Look at that man in the corner," she murmured, lowering her voice as she observed Keanu. "He seems out of place, doesn't he?" The husband, a finance executive, barely spared a glance. "Probably lost, or looking for a free meal," he muttered, returning his attention to his expensive bottle of wine. But not everyone in the restaurant shared their sentiment. At another table, an elderly gentleman in a navy blue suit continued to watch the unfolding scene with quiet interest. He had seen many things in his years, but rarely had he seen such dignity in the face of subtle humiliation. Lifting his glass slightly in Keanu's direction once again, he silently toasted the man's patience. Keanu, catching the gesture from his peripheral vision, responded with a small nod of acknowledgement. Ashley noticed it too, and it only fueled her irritation, escalating the game. By the time Ashley finally placed Keanu's order with the kitchen, she decided to add another layer to her condescending approach. Returning to his table, she held the menu up as if it were a delicate relic. "I just wanted to make sure," she began, her tone thick with mock concern, "that you fully understood the pricing. The filet de boeuf Rossini is quite a premium selection. It's $350. Would you like me to suggest something more accessible?" Keanu looked up at her, his expression unreadable. "I appreciate your concern," he said smoothly, his voice betraying no emotion. "But no, I'm sure of my order." Ashley folded her arms. "Of course, just wanted to clarify. Some guests misunderstand our menu and experience unexpected surprises when the bill arrives." Keanu smiled slightly. "I assure you, there won't be any surprises." For the first time, Ashley felt something unexpected. Doubt. Why was he so sure of himself? No arrogance, no frustration, no hesitation. Just a quiet, unwavering certainty. Still, she wasn't finished. An attempt to break the facade. As the meal continued, Ashley ensured that Keanu's experience remained subtly uncomfortable. When she delivered his appetizer, she slid the plate onto the table instead of placing it properly, causing it to shift slightly. "There you go," she said, her tone flippant. "Hope you enjoy, or at least know what you're eating." Keanu thanked her politely, ignoring the slight jab. She continued watching him from a distance, waiting for any sign of discomfort, any crack in his demeanor. But none came. Instead, what she noticed was something she hadn't expected. Other guests were starting to take an interest. Some watched with silent curiosity. Others, like the elderly man in the navy blue suit, grew visibly disapproving of her behavior. Still, Ashley pressed on. When the main course arrived, she took her time bringing it to his table, allowing it to sit under the warming lamps longer than necessary. By the time she finally served it, she leaned in and whispered, just loud enough for him to hear, "This is a dish meant to be appreciated by those who understand fine dining. Are you sure you'll enjoy it?" Keanu met her gaze directly. "Unsure," he replied, his voice carrying a quiet authority that sent a chill down her spine. For the first time, Ashley hesitated. The turning point. As Keanu dined, the murmurs in the restaurant grew louder. Some patrons seemed intrigued, while others looked appalled by Ashley's treatment of him. Then something happened that changed the atmosphere entirely. The restaurant manager, a middle-aged man with an impeccable posture and a sharp eye for detail, entered the dining room. He had been overseeing a private event in the back, unaware of what had been transpiring on the main floor. The moment his eyes landed on Keanu, his entire demeanor shifted. He froze. Then recognition dawned, and panic set in. Rushing forward, he brushed past Ashley without a second glance, his professional mask crumbling as he reached the table. "Mr. Reeves," the manager exclaimed, his voice filled with a mixture of surprise and reverence. I wasn't aware you were dining with us tonight." The entire restaurant fell silent. Ashley's face went pale. Keanu finally set down his utensils, glancing at the manager with the same calm expression he had maintained all evening. "Good evening," he said pleasantly. The manager's eyes darted from Keanu to Ashley, as if piecing together the events that had unfolded before his arrival. Ashley felt the blood drain from her face. Her heart pounded as the realization sank in. She had spent the entire night mocking, dismissing, and humiliating a man who was not just another guest. Keanu Reeves wasn't just a Hollywood icon. He was one of the owners of Lumiere Grand. And now, all eyes were on him. And her. The moment of truth. A chilling silence gripped Lumiere Grand. The soft murmur of wealthy patrons, once the heartbeat of the restaurant, had vanished. Every pair of eyes was now locked onto a single table, the one in the dimly lit corner where an unassuming guest had just been revealed as someone of immense importance. Ashley stood frozen, the reality of her situation settling in like a weight pressing down on her chest. Keanu Reeves, the man she had deliberately humiliated and dismissed, was not just a guest. He was an owner, and she had just made a mistake that could cost her everything. The manager's panic. The restaurant manager, a man who prided himself on maintaining an iron grip over Lumiere's reputation, was visibly shaken. He had spent years cultivating an atmosphere of perfection, every detail meticulously controlled, every guest's experience tailored for luxury. But tonight, he had failed. And worse, he had failed in front of Keanu Reeves, one of the most respected figures in the entertainment industry and a silent partner in the very restaurant he had been entrusted to oversee. "Mr. Reeves," the manager repeated, his voice barely masking his panic. I sincerely apologize for any misunderstanding. If I had known you were dining with us." Keanu gently raised a hand, cutting him off mid-sentence. His expression remained calm, yet the weight behind his gaze silenced the manager instantly. Ashley, still standing near the table, felt a wave of nausea rise in her throat. The realization sets in. The restaurant patrons, once entertained by the spectacle of an out-of-place man being subtly ridiculed, now shifted in their seats uncomfortably. The tide of opinion had turned. What had once been a quiet curiosity had now morphed into a growing discomfort. Ashley felt the weight of their stares, judgmental, disapproving, and worst of all, pitying. The very people she had sought to impress were now looking at her as the fool. Keanu finally spoke, his voice steady but carrying an unmistakable authority. "I've been coming here for years," he said, his eyes never leaving Ashley. "I helped build this place with the idea that everyone who walks through these doors should feel welcome. That the experience of dining here shouldn't be dictated by what someone wears, what car they drive, or how much they flaunt their wealth." The silence deepened. A few of the guests shifted in their seats, some averting their eyes as they realized they had contributed to the atmosphere of exclusivity that Ashley had embodied so ruthlessly. Keanu leaned forward slightly, his tone growing softer, but no less powerful. "But tonight," he continued, "I saw something different. I saw someone treated as less than, simply because of an assumption. And the thing about assumptions," he tilted his head slightly, "they can cost you more than you realize." Ashley's breath hitched. She wanted to defend herself, to explain that she hadn't known, that she was just following protocol, that she was only protecting the restaurant's image, but the words never came. Because deep down, she knew the truth. She hadn't just made a mistake. She had been exposed for exactly what she was. An uncomfortable shift. The well-dressed couple, who had initially whispered about Keanu's out-of-place attire, now sat in stunned silence. The elderly gentleman in the navy blue suit, who had been watching from afar, smiled knowingly and took another sip of his wine. And at a nearby table, a younger waitress, one who had always found Ashley's arrogance unbearable, folded her arms and smirked, watching the drama unfold with quiet satisfaction. The entire restaurant had turned. Ashley's arrogance had been built on the idea that she was always in control. But tonight, she had lost control completely. The final blow. The manager, sensing the irreversible damage of the situation, stepped in, his voice tight. "Ashley," he said through clenched teeth, "you will apologize. Now." Ashley's heart pounded in her chest. She swallowed hard, looking at Keanu, her pride clashing violently with her survival instincts. Every fiber of her being wanted to resist. She wanted to dismiss this, to laugh it off, to somehow regain even the smallest shred of dignity. But there was no escaping this. She had insulted the owner of Lumiere Grand, and now she had to face the consequences. Ashley inhaled shakily, forcing a smile that did nothing to hide the sheer humiliation painted across her face. I sincerely apologize for my behavior," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Keanu studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. But then, he did something no one expected. He smiled, and just like that, the tension in the air shifted again. Ashley, confused and momentarily hopeful that she might be forgiven, dared to look up. But Keanu wasn't finished. "I appreciate your apology," he said, his tone lighter now. "But I think there's a bigger lesson here." Ashley's stomach tightened. The lesson. A change in perspective. Keanu turned slightly, addressing not just Ashley but the entire restaurant. "This isn't about me," he said, his voice carrying through the dining room. "This is about how we treat people when we think no one is watching. About how we judge others based on nothing but appearances." A ripple of discomfort moved through the guests. Some looked down at their plates, avoiding his gaze. Others nodded in quiet agreement, suddenly forced to examine their own biases. "I didn't come here tonight to prove a point," Keanu continued. "I came to have dinner. But what happened here, what happens in places like this every day, that is something worth talking about." Ashley felt a cold sweat form along the back of her neck. For the first time in her life, she truly understood what it meant to be small. Keanu leaned back in his chair, his smile never fading. "This restaurant was built to be a place of inclusion," he said. "And going forward, I think we're going to have to make sure that's the standard we uphold." The manager, catching the implicit "you better fix this" tone, nodded so quickly it was almost comical. "Absolutely, Mr. Reeves," he said hastily. "I will personally oversee changes in staff training and customer service expectations." Keanu stood, placing his napkin neatly on the table. "Good," he said simply. Ashley, feeling the walls of her career closing in around her, watched in stunned silence. As Keanu moved to leave, he paused, turning back to her one last time. "Ashley," he said, his voice kind, but firm. She looked up, her hands trembling slightly. "I hope you take something from this," he said, "because how we treat others, that's what really defines us." And with that, Keanu walked out of Lumiere Grand, leaving behind an unforgettable lesson, one that would linger long after he was gone. The aftermath of arrogance. The grand doors of Lumiere Grand swung shut behind Keanu Reeves, leaving behind an atmosphere thick with unspoken words and hushed whispers. The weight of what had just transpired sat heavy in the air, the golden chandeliers above flickering their warm light upon a room that had fallen into stunned silence. For the first time that evening, Ashley, the once proud gatekeeper of exclusivity, felt small. The elite diners who had silently condoned her behavior were no longer entertained by her antics. Instead, their gazes held something far worse than disapproval: pity. She had lost control of the narrative. She had spent years crafting an image of dominance within these walls, an untouchable force who dictated who deserved to be here and who didn't. But now, in the space of a single evening, her arrogance had been exposed as nothing more than insecurity wrapped in fine silk. Her legs trembled beneath her polished black heels as she felt the weight of the moment crashing down on her. And then, just when she thought it couldn't get any worse, her manager spoke. The reckoning. Ashley. The manager's voice was cold, lacking the patience he had once extended to her. In my office. Now. The restaurant's patrons, still whispering among themselves, stole glances as Ashley stiffened. Every part of her wanted to refuse, to hold on to the last scraps of her authority. But she knew there was no fighting this. Slowly, she turned and walked toward the back of the restaurant, feeling a trail of burning stares sear into her back. As she passed by a table near the bar, the elderly gentleman in the navy blue suit, the one who had watched everything unfold, gave her a knowing glance. There was no malice in his expression, only quiet disappointment. Ashley averted her eyes. She reached the manager's office, stepping inside before he could even shut the door behind her. The second it clicked shut, he turned on her. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" His voice, usually controlled, cracked with barely contained frustration. "Do you even realize who you just insulted?" Ashley swallowed hard, her mind racing for an explanation. I didn't know he was the owner," she blurted, hoping for some kind of reprieve. "He came in dressed like someone who—" The manager slammed a hand against his desk, silencing her instantly. "Stop talking," he ordered, his eyes burning with anger. "Just stop." Ashley shrank back, the fire of her earlier arrogance extinguished. The manager ran a hand through his graying hair, exhaling sharply. "We built this restaurant with a reputation of excellence," he said, his voice low but cutting. "Not just in our food, not just in our atmosphere, but in the way we treat people. Keanu Reeves, our owner, helped create this place with the belief that everyone should feel welcome here." Ashley's stomach churned. He continued, not giving her a second to recover. "And what did you do tonight?" His words lashed at her like a whip. "You mocked him. You belittled him. You tried to push him out as if he was beneath this place. And the worst part," he leaned forward, his expression hard, "you weren't just humiliating him. You were humiliating us. Every single person in this restaurant witnessed your behavior." Ashley could barely breathe. The reality of the situation was worse than she had anticipated. Because the damage wasn't just limited to her reputation. She had tainted the restaurant's reputation. And that was unforgivable. The consequences. "I can't have staff members who make our guests feel unwelcome," the manager said, shaking his head. "I can't have someone working for me who treats people like dirt just because they don't fit into her perfect little mold." Ashley's eyes widened. She knew where this was going. "Wait, please," she begged, her voice cracking. I can change. I was just—" The manager cut her off. "No, Ashley," he said firmly. "You don't belong here." The words struck her harder than any insult she had ever thrown at a guest. For years, she had prided herself on deciding who was worthy of dining at Lumiere. And now, she was the one being cast out. "You're fired," the manager said, his voice final. "Effective immediately." Ashley opened her mouth, searching for something, anything, to say. but there was nothing. Because deep down, she knew she deserved this. The exclusivity she had worshipped had turned against her. And just like that, she was the one whom no longer belonged. A bitter goodbye. Ashley left the manager's office in a daze, her feet moving on autopilot as she walked toward the staff area to collect her belongings. The whispers in the dining room had shifted from curiosity to confirmation. She's leaving. I heard she got fired on the spot. Serves her right. Her hands trembled as she shoved her personal items into her bag, barely aware of the waitress beside her. The younger one who had been quietly watching her all night. You know, the younger waitress finally spoke, her voice neutral. You always acted like this place was yours, like you had the right to decide who belonged and who didn't. Ashley didn't respond. But in the end, the waitress shrugged. Turns out, you were the one who didn't belong. Ashley clenched her jaw, fighting back the sting of humiliation. Then, without another word, she turned and walked out of Lumiere Grand for the last time. The restaurant's transformation. In the days that followed, the story of Keanu Reeves' night at Lumiere Grand spread like wildfire. The restaurant's management scrambled to implement new training for their staff, one that emphasized respect, humility, and the true vision behind the establishment. Keanu, despite having every right to demand drastic changes, remained true to his nature. Instead of firing anyone beyond Ashley, he suggested something else. A meeting. Keanu's final lesson. 1 week later, the staff of Lumiere Grand gathered for a private seminar. Keanu Reeves stood before them, his presence calm but commanding. We all make mistakes, he began, but what matters is what we do after we make them. The waitstaff sat in silence, absorbing every word. This restaurant was built to be more than just a place for the wealthy, he continued. It was built to be a place where everyone, regardless of their appearance, their background, or their bank account, could have an experience worth remembering. He let that settle before adding. And that starts with the way we treat people. The staff nodded, some ashamed, others inspired. The younger waitress, who had spoken to Ashley before she left, smiled softly to herself. Change was coming, and for the first time, Lumiere Grand was going to live up to the vision it was meant to uphold. A final reflection. That night, as Keanu walked out of Lumiere Grand once more, he paused at the entrance, gazing up at the shimmering sign. It was still the same restaurant, but it felt different, better. And he knew, in that moment, that sometimes the smallest acts, whether of kindness or cruelty, could change everything. And tonight, change had arrived. A lesson in humility. 1 week later, the ripple effect. The once exquisite Lumiere Grand was now a place of quiet reflection. Though it still boasted its golden chandeliers, pristine white tablecloths, and exclusive clientele, something had shifted within its walls. The air was different. The humiliation of that fateful evening, when Keanu Reeves had been wrongly judged, had left an unshakable imprint. Staff members now moved with a new awareness, a fresh unease lingering in their steps. Ashley's departure had been swift and unspectacular. She had walked out of the restaurant a different woman than the one who had strutted in each evening with an air of entitlement. But even though she was gone, her mistake remained as a cautionary tale. Her colleagues spoke about it in hushed voices behind the bar and in the kitchen. Did you see how calm he was the whole time? Yeah, and the way she kept trying to get a reaction out of him. She really thought she was in charge, didn't she? The other waitstaff had witnessed it all. The power shift, the public disgrace, and Keanu's quiet dominance. But while the gossip swirled, Keanu Reeves had moved on. And yet, his presence still lingered. A change in the restaurant's DNA. The restaurant manager, shaken by the incident, called an emergency meeting for the entire staff. We failed, he admitted, standing before them, his hands clasped behind his back. Not just Ashley, but all of us. We allowed a culture of arrogance to seep into our service. And we were lucky, very lucky, that Mr. Reeves is a man of patience. The room remained silent, the weight of his words pressing down on every employee. "We can't afford another mistake like this," he continued. "Which is why, starting today, this restaurant will be different. We will no longer judge people by their appearance. We will no longer assume who belongs and who doesn't. We are here to serve, not to exclude." For some of the older staff, it was a wake-up call. For the younger ones, it was a warning. One thing was clear: the old ways of Lumiere Grand were dead, and a new era had begun. Ashley's fall from grace. Meanwhile, across town, Ashley sat in a small, dimly lit cafe. Not a luxury one, but a regular corner cafe with chipped wooden tables and a machine that brewed basic coffee, no imported blends. She stared down at her cup, her fingers tracing the rim absent-mindedly. For the first time in years, she wasn't wearing her pristine uniform, no designer accessories, no carefully curated image of superiority. Just Ashley, and for the first time in years, she had no idea who that was. Her phone sat face down on the table, its screen flooded with messages, some from former colleagues, some from acquaintances who had heard about what happened. But she couldn't bring herself to read them. She didn't need to. She already knew what they said. She had lost everything: her status, her power, her control. And the worst part, she had no one to blame but herself. A chance encounter. The door of the cafe jingled, signaling the entrance of a new customer. Ashley barely looked up until she heard a familiar voice. "Mind if I sit here?" Her breath caught in her throat. Slowly, she raised her eyes. Standing before her was Keanu Reeves. For a long, tense moment, neither of them spoke. Ashley's fingers tightened around her cup, her pulse racing. Was he here to gloat? To humiliate her further? To remind her of everything she had lost? But his expression was calm. Not smug. Not triumphant. Just calm. "Why are you here?" Ashley finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Keanu smiled slightly. "I was passing by. Thought I'd grab a coffee." He glanced at the empty seat across from her. "And you looked like you could use some company." Ashley's throat felt dry. "Why?" Keanu tilted his head. "Because I believe people can change." Ashley let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "Yeah? Well, tell that to the people who don't want to hire me anymore." Keanu leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table. "Ashley, do you even know what went wrong that night?" She looked away. She hesitated. Yes. She knew. But saying it aloud, that was different. She exhaled slowly. "I thought I was better than him." "Than you," she admitted. "I thought I was protecting the restaurant's image. I thought I was right." Keanu nodded, as if he had expected that answer. "And now?" Ashley swallowed. "Now I realize how stupid I was." Keanu studied her for a long moment before finally speaking. "Stupid isn't the right word," he said. "You were conditioned." Ashley frowned. "What?" "You weren't born thinking like that," Keanu continued. "Somewhere along the way, you were taught to believe that worth is measured by appearance, by wealth, by exclusivity. And you believed it. You let it define you." Ashley's breath hitched. Because, deep down, she knew he was right. She had spent years trying to climb a social ladder that never truly existed. And now here she was, back at the bottom. A different kind of opportunity. Keanu leaned back in his seat, regarding her carefully. "So what now?" he asked. Ashley shook her head. "I don't know. No one wants to hire me. My reputation is ruined." She laughed bitterly. "You really came here just to watch me suffer?" Keanu smiled slightly. "No." Ashley frowned. "Then why?" Keanu took a sip of his coffee before setting it down. "Because I have an offer for you." Ashley froze. "What?" Keanu's expression remained unreadable. "You want to prove you've changed?" he asked. "Then work for me." Ashley's eyes widened. You want me to work for you?" Keanu nodded. "But not at Lumiere Grand." "Not yet." Ashley's heart pounded. Then where? Keanu set his cup down, his fingers drumming lightly against the table. There's a shelter in town, a community kitchen. They serve meals to people who can't afford a place like Lumiere. Ashley's breath caught. You want me to work in a soup kitchen? Keanu smiled. I want you to learn, he corrected. To see people for who they really are. To understand that value isn't about luxury. It's about humanity. Ashley stared at him, struggling to process what was happening. She had spent years looking down on people, and now she was being given an opportunity to make things right. She hesitated, but deep down, she knew this was her only chance to change. She exhaled. Okay, she said, her voice shaking. Keanu's smile widened. Good. Ashley felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The road to redemption. A new beginning in an unfamiliar world. Ashley stood in front of a modest brick building on the outskirts of downtown Los Angeles, staring at the large sign above the entrance. Street Andrews Community Kitchen, serving with compassion. The air smelled of warm bread, simmering soup, and something else she wasn't used to, humility. She tightened her grip on the strap of her handbag, her nerves bubbling beneath the surface. This wasn't Lumiere Grand. There were no chandeliers, no elegant music floating through the air, no exclusive guest lists. Just a long line of hungry people waiting for a meal. And standing at the entrance, greeting volunteers and patrons alike, was Keanu Reeves. Ashley felt a lump in her throat. This wasn't just a job. It was a test. One she wasn't sure she could pass. The first shift, a harsh reality check. Keanu spotted her and waved her over, his expression warm but expectant. Ashley, he greeted. Glad you came. She forced a tight smile. Yeah, well, you gave me an offer I couldn't refuse. Keanu chuckled. Fair enough. Come on, let me introduce you to the team. He led her inside, where a dozen volunteers bustled around large metal pots, ladling soup into bowls and plating simple but hearty meals. The kitchen was alive with movement. No perfectly polished uniforms. No silent, rehearsed service. Just people helping people. Keanu stopped near a woman in her late 50s with short gray hair and kind eyes. This is Maria, Keanu introduced. She's been running the kitchen for over a decade. Maria wiped her hands on her apron before extending one toward Ashley. Welcome, she said warmly. Hope you're ready to work. We got a full house today. Ashley hesitated before shaking her hand. Yeah. I'm ready. Maria nodded approvingly before handing her a simple apron. Good. You'll be on serving duty today. Think you can handle that? Ashley slipped the apron over her head, already feeling the unfamiliar weight of it. I think so. Maria gave her a knowing look. You'll learn fast. Let's get started. The first mistake. At Lumiere Grand, Ashley had been accustomed to memorizing orders, adjusting silverware at perfect angles, and ensuring guests felt like royalty. Here, things were different. As she ladled soup into a bowl, she felt awkward, unsure if she was doing it correctly. The movement wasn't graceful, it wasn't second nature, and it definitely wasn't elegant. The first guest in line, a woman in an oversized hoodie with tired eyes, stepped forward, holding out her tray. Ashley tried to flash a polished smile, but it felt forced. Here you go, she said, handing over the bowl. The woman took it without looking up. Thanks, she mumbled before shuffling toward a table. Ashley exhaled. Okay, that wasn't so bad. Then came the next guest, and the next. And soon, she fell into a rhythm. Until she made her first mistake. A man, clearly exhausted, his face weathered by years of hardship, approached the counter. Ashley, distracted by her own thoughts, didn't realize that she had only given him half a portion of food. Maria, watching nearby, stepped forward. Ashley, she said gently, you forgot to give him the full serving. Ashley blinked. "Oh, I didn't mean to." Maria didn't scold her. She simply nodded toward the man. "Fix it." Ashley felt heat rush to her face as she quickly corrected the mistake, ladling more soup into his bowl. The man gave her a tired but grateful nod before moving along. Ashley expected Maria to critique her, to tell her how she had messed up. Instead, Maria simply patted her shoulder. "It's not about perfection," she said. "It's about caring. Just remember that." Ashley nodded slowly, swallowing hard. This was harder than she thought, breaking down the walls. As the day wore on, Ashley felt something strange happening. She was listening. Not just taking orders, not just moving efficiently, but actually hearing people's stories. A woman told her about how she lost her home after medical bills drowned her in debt. An elderly man shared how he once had a successful business, but lost everything after one wrong investment. A teenage boy, barely old enough to be on his own, whispered that this was his first hot meal in days. And with each story, Ashley felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: empathy. These weren't just people taking advantage of charity. These were human beings, people who had once belonged in the very world she had fought so hard to impress. She thought back to Lumiere Grand, to the guests she had catered to. Had she ever really seen them? Or had she only seen their wealth? The turning point. By the time the evening rush had slowed, Ashley found herself standing outside, wiping her hands on her apron. Keanu joined her, holding 2 cups of coffee, one of which he handed to her. She accepted it, feeling exhausted in a way she never had before. "Long day?" Keanu asked, sipping his coffee. Ashley let out a dry laugh. "You could say that." Keanu studied her for a moment. "And what do you think?" Ashley exhaled, staring out at the street where some of the guests were still lingering, talking amongst themselves. "I thought this place would be depressing," she admitted. "But it's not." Keanu nodded. "It's humbling." Ashley swallowed. "Yeah, it is." She hesitated before turning to face him fully. "I used to think that status was everything. That how you look, how you present yourself, is what defines your worth." Keanu didn't interrupt. He just listened. "But today," Ashley continued, her voice quieter now, "I realized I've been wrong. For a long time." Keanu smiled slightly. "That's a good realization to have." Ashley chuckled, shaking her head. "Took me losing everything to figure it out. Sometimes that's the only way to learn." She stared at him for a long moment. You didn't have to do this. You could have just let me get fired and disappear." Keanu tilted his head. "And what would that have accomplished?" Ashley didn't have an answer. Keanu took a final sip of his coffee before setting it down on the ledge beside him. "I wasn't trying to punish you, Ashley," he said. "I was giving you a choice." Ashley frowned. "A choice?" Keanu nodded. "To be better. To grow. And I think you've started doing that." She didn't know why, but those words hit her harder than she expected. For the first time in years, someone wasn't looking at her with judgment. He was looking at her with hope. And for the first time in years, she wanted to live up to it. The true meaning of worth. 6 months later, a different woman. The sun dipped below the skyline of Los Angeles, casting long golden shadows over the streets. The world continued as it always had, fast, loud, and unbothered by the individual struggles of those moving through it. But for Ashley, everything had changed. Gone were the days of polished arrogance, of high heels clicking against marble floors, of looking at people as if they needed to prove they belonged. Now she stood outside Street Andrews Community Kitchen, tying the apron around her waist like it was second nature. She wasn't just a volunteer anymore. She was part of something bigger. She had learned the names of the people who came for meals. She had heard their stories, held their hands, laughed with them, and sometimes even cried. And for the first time in her life, she felt seen. Not for her appearance, not for her social standing, but for the person she had become. A surprise visit. Ashley. Maria called from the kitchen. Someone's here to see you. Ashley wiped her hands on a rag before stepping into the main hall. She froze. Standing near the entrance, dressed in his usual laid-back style, was Keanu Reeves. It had been months since their last conversation over coffee. Though he had checked in a few times, he had deliberately kept his distance, allowing Ashley to choose her own path. Now he was back. Ashley felt an odd nervousness creep up her spine. Was this a test? Had he come to see if she had truly changed? Taking a deep breath, she walked over to him. "Didn't think I'd see you here," she said, crossing her arms but unable to hide the small smile on her lips. Keanu smirked, figured it was time to check in. He glanced around, taking in the busy kitchen, the tables full of guests, the volunteers working tirelessly. "Looks like you've been busy." Ashley nodded. "Yeah, it's different, but I love it." Keanu studied her carefully, then gave a small nod of approval. "I'm proud of you," he said. Ashley's breath hitched. No one had ever said that to her before. For a moment, she wasn't sure what to say. Finally, she chuckled. "It wasn't easy, you know. I had to face a lot of things about myself that I didn't want to admit." Keanu tilted his head. "And what did you learn?" Ashley exhaled. "That I was chasing all the wrong things: status, validation, exclusivity. I thought those things made me important." She looked around the dining hall, watching as volunteers handed out meals with warm smiles, as patrons shared laughter despite their struggles. "But this makes me important." Keanu smiled. "That's what I was hoping you'd see." Ashley glanced at him, curiosity flickering in her eyes. "Why did you do it?" she asked. "Why not just let me fall?" Keanu considered the question for a moment before responding. "Because I've been where you were," he admitted. Ashley's brows lifted. "You?" Keanu nodded. "Not in the same way, but yeah. There was a time in my life when I let the world define me by superficial things. Money, fame, image. It's easy to get lost in that, but life has a way of humbling you." His eyes darkened slightly, as if recalling old wounds. Ashley didn't push. "But not everyone gets the chance to change," Keanu continued. "Most people just keep going, trapped in their own arrogance. But you had the chance to learn, and you took it." Ashley swallowed hard. 6 months ago, she had never imagined standing here, hearing these words from him. But now, she felt like she had finally found her place. An unexpected offer. Keanu shifted slightly. "So, I actually came here for a reason," he said, a hint of mischief in his tone. Ashley raised an eyebrow. "Oh." Keanu nodded. "Lumiere Grand has changed a lot since you left. We overhauled our staff training. We've made sure that every guest, regardless of what they look like, feels welcome. It's the restaurant we always should have been." Ashley felt a pang of nostalgia at the mention of Lumiere. Once she had ruled over that place like a queen. Now she wasn't sure if she even belonged there anymore. Keanu continued, "We need someone who understands what not to do. Someone who's been on both sides. Someone who can make sure no one ever feels unwelcome again." Ashley frowned. "Wait, are you saying?" Keanu smiled. "I want you to come back." Ashley's breath caught. "Back? To Lumiere?" The thought sent a whirlwind of emotions crashing over her. She had spent months unlearning the very mentality that Lumiere had once fostered. Could she really go back? "I don't know, Keanu," she admitted, rubbing the back of her neck. "This place, Street Andrews, it feels like home now." Keanu nodded. "And it should. But that doesn't mean you can't do more." Ashley hesitated. Going back to Lumiere meant facing the people she had once looked down on. It meant proving, not just to others, but to herself, that she had truly changed. Finally, she exhaled. "I'll think about it." Keanu grinned. "That's all I ask." A different kind of return. A week later, Ashley found herself standing outside Lumiere Grand, staring at the same elegant golden sign she had once walked under daily. She had once believed this place made her important. Now she knew better. Taking a deep breath, she stepped inside. The restaurant was the same, yet completely different. The energy had changed. There was warmth where there had once been coldness. The hostess at the front desk greeted her with a genuine smile, not one of forced politeness, but real kindness. Ashley approached the bar, where the manager spotted her. His eyes widened slightly. "Ashley," he said, setting down a glass. "Didn't think I'd see you here again." She smiled. "Yeah, me neither." He studied her for a moment before nodding. "Keanu told me what he had in mind," he said. "I think it's a good idea." Ashley felt a twinge of uncertainty. "Are you sure? I mean, I wasn't exactly a shining example of hospitality before." The manager chuckled. "No, you weren't. But you learned. And honestly, that's more valuable than perfection." Ashley exhaled slowly. She wasn't the same woman who had once ruled this place with a sense of entitlement. She was better. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to prove it. A full circle moment. 2 weeks later, Lumiere Grand welcomed a new guest, an older man in worn jeans and a simple jacket. Ashley, now the restaurant's customer experience consultant, approached him with a warm smile. "Welcome to Lumiere Grand," she said genuinely. "Right this way, sir." She led him to a prime table, not a dimly lit corner. The man smiled. "Nice place. Wasn't sure if I'd fit in here." Ashley met his gaze. "Everyone fits in here," she said. And for the first time, she truly meant it.